Good morning. This is Tuesday morning, November 10th. This is the follow-up video to the assignment EM-1, Energy and Matter 1, on creating chains and webs to model ecological relationships. This is the document that you will be working with. It is in Google Classroom. And basically what we're doing in this activity is we are creating three different ways to model the flow of energy through an ecosystem. All organisms need two basic things from their environment in order to survive. One, they need energy. Two, they need matter. And we get our energy and we get our matter from our food that we eat. This activity focuses on the flow of energy. A few days we'll be doing some activities that focus on the flow of matter. But energy is something that is required in order for us to maintain an organized body, an organized system. This structure we call our bodies is a highly organized system of atoms. It is not randomly put together. It is arranged very specifically, and it has a high level of organization that allows us to function and survive. And anytime you want to maintain organization, it requires energy. Analogy, you want to have a clean bedroom. You want things off the floor, clothes put away properly, bed made. Somebody's got to spend energy doing that. If you don't spend energy doing that, you have an unmade bed, you have a messy floor, you have things out of in disorder. That's what happens. Nature favors disorder, chaos, entropy. So you have to have energy to maintain this organized structure. The day you stop providing energy efficiently to your body, of course, it's going to start to shut down. You eventually die. And after you die, your body decomposes. It goes back into a simple pile of elements. Why? Because it takes less energy to be a pile of elements than it takes to be an organized living structure. So energy has to be provided in the environment in order for organisms to keep their organized structures intact. Thus, there has to be a source of energy that flows through any ecosystem. And so in this activity, we're going to look at food chains, energy pyramids, and food webs. Probably things you've all had experience with, but we're going to look at them as models, ways to represent the flow of energy and explain the flow of energy, and then we're going to compare them as models. For this activity, there's also in the Google Classroom a set of images. Now in class, we have them cut out into cards. Yours I've got, so they're on a PDF. I suppose you could print them out and cut them out if you wanted to. I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but there are plant and animal cards. So for example, here's small trees and shrubs as an example of a producer or a plant. And here's an elephant. And on the back of all the animal cards, there is information about each organism. In the ones that are in Google Classroom, the descriptions in the picture lay side to side for a little easier use. So I'm just going to walk you through the activity. So if you're looking at the first page, actually, let me share my screen for a second. And if I go over here and bring up Google Classroom, right here's the food chains, food webs activity. And here is the document. All right, so it's a Google document. You can type right in it. And here are the cards. So you can see they've got them side by side. You don't necessarily have to print out the cards whatsoever or cut them out. You just need to be able to reference them and write the names down as you create the different models. So there are cards for the animals. There are plant cards which have no information on them. They're just producers. They photosynthesize, convert light energy into chemical energy. And later on, there are some what's called disturbance cards. These cards called drought, agricultural deforestation, war, fires. Those are disturbance cards, and those will come in later to play in the activity. All right, so as long as you have the document open and you can reference the cards, you should be okay without having to print them. So anyway, if you're looking at the document, there's 4 parts to the activity. So I'm going to briefly explain each part. So part 1, first thing you're going to do is take just the animal plant cards. Again, you'll do it on your image, and you're counting how many of these are producers and how many of these are consumers? Well, remember, producers have the ability to produce their own food. Now, producers don't make their own energy. They convert energy. Law of thermodynamics, energy is neither created nor destroyed, but simply changed from one form to another. So producers can take light energy and convert it into chemical energy in the form of organic molecules like sugar, which then we call food. So producers have the ability to make their own food, so they don't have to go and find their food, which is good if you're a plant because you're typically not mobile. Consumers are organisms that do not have the ability to photosynthesize. They cannot convert light energy into chemical energy. They get their chemical energy by consuming, eating plants and animals that eat plants. Thus, you have your consumers. So you're looking at producers, consumers, you're looking at the basic flow of energy, and then you're going to select 4 cards to create a simple food chain. So a food chain is just showing one feeding relationship. All food chains start with what? All food chains start with producers. They start with the plants. Somebody's got to take the light energy. Remember, the sun's the ultimate source of energy. Someone has to take the light energy and convert it into chemical energy, food, sugar. And so you always have to start with a producer. Then second level, you need somebody who eats the producer. Typically, we call that the herbivore, or the primary consumer. Then we need somebody that eats the primary consumer. Typically, that's some type of carnivore or omnivore. We call that the secondary consumer. And then we need a 4th level, someone who eats the carnivore or omnivore, which is typically another carnivore or omnivore, and we call that the tertiary or 3rd level consumer. So there are a number of different correct food chains you can make using the cards. So you need to look through the cards and make one that works. Again, look at the information next to the card. It tells you what their diet is. It tells you who eats who. So you need one that's got a producer, an herbivore, a primary consumer, a carnivore, omnivore, or a secondary consumer, and then a tertiary consumer. And you're going to build that chain. In class, we laid the cards on a whiteboard, and then using a marker. All right, so we would put the card on the whiteboard. I can't do this very well through here, but we'd have the card sitting on the whiteboard, and we would draw arrows to show which way the energy goes on the whiteboard. So think about it, which way should the arrow point? Does the energy flow from, say we have grass and grasshoppers? Does the energy flow from the grass to the grasshopper, or does the energy flow from the grasshopper to the grass? Hopefully we know the energy goes from the grass to the grasshopper, so the arrow should be pointing from the grass to the grasshopper. Energy tends to move up the food chain. All right, so in the first activity, you're basically creating a simple food chain using 4 organisms. That's part 1. Then in part 1, on page 2, there's a chart where you're going to pick a disturbance. On the handout, there are 6 disturbances. You can choose deforestation and agriculture. You can choose tourism. You can choose increasing human population. You can choose drought. You can choose fire. And you can choose war. Doesn't matter, totally your choice which one you pick. On the back of these, and again, they're side by side on the ones you have, but on the back of whichever disturbance you choose, there is some description. There is some description. I'm going to bring up this document just for a second. And so when you get to part 2 and you pick your disturbance, you're going to fill in this chart. So you're going to write whatever your disturbance is right here. Let's say you chose fire. Based on the information on the back of the card and what you know, you're going to describe 4 impacts fires have on the ecosystem. And then in this column, you're going to specifically talk about how would fire affect the primary producer, good or bad. How would fire specifically affect the primary consumer? Again, good or bad. How would it specifically affect the secondary consumer, positive or negative? And how would it affect the tertiary consumer, positive or negative? And so you're going to take a look at how a disturbance could change the model, could influence the food chain. We just talked about disturbances in the context of succession. Same idea. Disturbances disrupt the environment and change the rules. And how does it affect the food chain that you created? Following that, you're going to go into model 2. We're going to take and go from a food chain to a food pyramid or an energy pyramid. On the energy pyramid, on the very last page, there is a blank pyramid. You're going to add the same 4 organisms to the pyramid. Right? You're going to add the same 4 organisms to the pyramid. So if you're doing a so on this pyramid, if I say chose short grass, it would go on the bottom. That's where the producer is. If I chose the grasshopper would go here, and you'd fill in the same 4 organisms. And based on that pyramid, you're going to answer the questions back here under model 2 or part 2. At one point on page 10, or no, question 10, I'm sorry. Question 10, it says, let's assume that the plant has 3,500,000 kilocalories. So you're going to go back to your model. You're going to put 3,500,000 kilocalories at the bottom level, and then you need to calculate how much goes to the second level, how much goes to the third level, how much goes to the fourth level, and write those numbers in. So you're going to follow what's called the 10% rule and show how the energy changes as you go up the pyramid. So you'll have organisms listed in here, and you'll have numbers of kilocalories that go to each level. And then you'll respond to the questions in part 2 based on the energy pyramid that you create. Hopefully that's making sense. Then in model 3, you are going to lay out a food web. So you're going to still stick, so let me back up. On model 2, use the same 4 organisms you used for your food chain. Put those 4 organisms into your energy pyramid, use the same 4. And then when you get to part 3, you're going to create a web, start with the same 4 again. Start with the same 4 again, and then you're going to add, it's in the directions, you're going to add more organisms to your food chain to turn it into a food web, which means you're going to have many more arrows and many more connections in your drawing. So again, in class, we would have laid those out on the whiteboard. I'm just going to try to see if I can do something here real quick. I'm just laying something out. Let me slide around. I don't know if I can get you to see this or not. So I'm going to come out of the document for just a second. And so on the whiteboard in class, again, you can just do this by doing it on the paper. We would have laid the cards out, and we would have taken our marker and we would have started to add arrows. And so I've got some small trees and shrubs here. Let's say I've got some tall grass. I just lost my marker. Excuse me 1 second. I would just start making all the connections I could make. So kadoos will eat the grass. They'll also eat the leaves off the trees. Wildebeest will eat the grass and the trees. Zebras will eat the grass and the leaves off the trees. The lions will eat the kadoos, the wildebeest, the zebras. So you're making all the connections you can. Ultimately, everybody will, if they die, the vultures will eat their bodies. Whoops, I'm writing on my card. And we start to create what's called a food web. All right, now you need to follow the rules that are in the directions for creating your food web, but you'll end up creating something like this. Okay, and that's part 3 of the activity, is creating this food web. Then you're going to go back again. Once you have your food web, I'll share my screen again. You are going to put your food web in this big box. Just with words and arrows. And then you are going to go to a second disturbance. It has to be, again, there's 6 of them. You used one of them already. You're going to pick a second disturbance, different, it has to be different from the first one. And you're going to use that second disturbance, and the same idea now, though you're applying it to the whole food web instead of just the food chain. So say this time you choose drought. You're going to talk about some of the effects drought has, positive or negative, and then you're going to apply exactly what drought would do to each of those levels. So you're applying it to a food web in this case instead of a food chain. So by the time you've done those 3 steps, you've made a food chain with 4 organisms. You've then re-represented that same food chain by creating an energy pyramid. And in the 3rd step, you've expanded that food chain into a food web. The final step that you need to do then on the very last page is analyze those models. So in this first column here, what are a couple things each of these is good for? What is a food chain good for? And then what is sort of a downside to a food chain? What is a food chain not good at? What's an energy pyramid good for? What's an energy pyramid not so good for? Etc. So for example, on food chains, what's positive about a food chain? Well, food chain gives you a very quick, simple picture of a single feeding relationship within the environment. So it's simple, it's easy to read, it's easy to follow. It gives you specific information about a specific relationship. The downside is it's a very simplified picture. You're not seeing the whole story. You're not seeing all the connections in the environment. So it's a little bit of a simplified picture. But if I'm doing something like the study of the sea otters and the sea urchins and the kelp forest, focusing on just the food chain is a good model. I don't need to focus on the whole food web. I'm most interested in how this keystone species, the otter, affects the urchin, which affects the kelp. So in that case, a food chain would be a very appropriate model to use. But if I'm trying to make a decision about whether I should reintroduce the wolf to Isle Royal and bring the moose population back under control, I need more than just the food chain information. I need a whole food web. I need to understand how the whole island is going to be affected if I bring the wolf back versus if I don't bring the wolf back. In that case, I want more of a food web perspective. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So you'll finish that up. And basically at the end of the activity, we're hoping you understand there's 3 different models that are commonly used to represent the flow of energy and sort of the strengths and weaknesses of each model. And when you might employ each model to tell your story. That should put you in good shape to complete that activity. Have fun with it, and we will be in touch. Thank you for your time.